excited to have you on today. What would you say defines your lifestyle?
What defines my lifestyle? I think my lifestyle is continually learning. And so I'm often like, what is my hobby? My hobby is learning. What is my interest? My interest is really like growing and learning in that way.
Oh, I love that. And you come from an education background, so it's just innate in you.
Mm-hmm.
And what in your childhood made you really interested in learning and education and helping kids?
I don't think it was much about what happened in my childhood in a positive way. It was like what was missing in my childhood, right? So I think of the work that I'm doing now is really about filling the gaps that were missing when I was in my youth. You know, like, where could I have achieved more? What could I have done more? Where could I have learned more? And there was a lot of emphasis placed on good grades, but not the learning part. And I think that was something that I grew into later in life.
Interesting. And what would you say a moment in time in your childhood that you can remember that really defined who you are as a person today?
I think a moment in time for me is when I was diagnosed with diabetes. So I have type 1 diabetes, and I was diagnosed rather late in my life. Usually it's younger onset, so I was 17. So I was a junior in high school. I had lived most of my life, you know, as a young child in a certain way, and then all of a sudden now I'm a teenager. I'm a year away from going to college, living on my own, and I have to live with how I eat, when I eat, insulin, all of those things. And I really, in looking back on my life, I think that was a really defining moment for me.
That's interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
It really was. Yeah. I mean, I think if I could go back in time, it would have been nice to maybe take another year at home to sort of learn how to live within this lifestyle, with this disability or disease. Because when I got to college, all the habits that I had created at home didn't work. You know, I was eating at a buffet. Mm-hmm. I'd never done that before. There was dessert available all the time. I also was like experiencing a loss of like my childhood, of like, you know, doing things like that. So it was like I was in this world of being on my own without really knowing how to live with that skill on my own.
You totally had to shift how you thought about food and your body and just how you went through the world, which is crazy.
It was really weird.
That's so interesting. But thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
And I really am so interested in your business and your profession and what you do. Can you kind of take us through the journey?
Yeah. So the journey, I would say, started when I graduated college. You know, I thought I knew what I was going out to do. I was on a mission. It was the 90s, so it was reduce, reuse, recycle, and I was going to save the world. And I didn't get a job that was really doing that. I got a job that paid the bills, but it wasn't really doing the environmental aspect that I wanted. And so I was at a crossroads. If I wanted to make money, I would continually really have to do this kind of work, but I didn't really want to do that. So I went into teaching, and I had a couple of teachers who really inspired me to love chemistry, and I thought that's what it was that I was meant to do, was teach chemistry, and I did for about 18, 20 years. But really what I was learning through that experience was I was teaching young kids, teenagers, that they could do hard things. Because chemistry is hard.
Oh, that's the one subject I did not get.
So many people say
it's so hard.
Yeah, and it's got all of the components of everything in it. And so I would have kids come into my classroom and they were like, oh, I heard chemistry is really hard. And I'm like, yeah, but we'll get through it. And I don't think there were any students in my class, unless they were absent for long period of times or actively didn't do the work, that failed my class, because there were resources, there were supports, there were each other, you know, and so that was what I was doing for most of my experience. And then I wanted more. I didn't want to just be a teacher. And I feel like my identity was really defined by teaching. And there was a moment where I was like, if I'm not a teacher, what else am I?
Sure.
And that really hit me hard because I think we are very multifaceted, but for me, like just identifying with one thing really meant I put all my eggs in one basket. And if that basket wasn't supporting me anymore, what else could I put my eggs in? And so, crazy analogy, I don't know why I went there, but so I had something open up at the school I was teaching. It was a student leadership class. The kids in my school earned 2 credits if they wanted to in extracurricular or elective credits through leadership. And I was given the opportunity to be the advisor of that class. And as soon as I started, I knew I had found something that I truly, truly loved. I loved teaching and I loved empowering kids. And this class really allowed me to do all of the things that I wanted to do. And it was a great experience, but I learned that there are some challenges. When we put kids in leadership positions, we give them a title, and with a title, there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that. And as a teenager, you're bound to make mistakes. As an adult, everybody makes mistakes. But a teenager with a title who makes a mistake is really impacted in a way that they're not prepared for. And we as adults in their lives don't really prepare them for what happens. They're role models, so we want, if they make a mistake, we want to make an example out of them. Which is great for all of the other kids, but that one individual student, that's not so great for them. They learn that mistakes are bad. They learn that if they make a mistake, they probably shouldn't tell anyone.
Yeah.
They learn to hide their mistakes, and it's also a negative impact on all those other kids that we're trying to teach not to do this, because they're seeing this one individual make a mistake, and they're like, I make a ton of mistakes, so I really can't do that. So that launched me into trying to find a way to make it possible for kids to develop leadership skills by allowing them to make mistakes. And it couldn't really work in the system of school because they really rely on the role model situation. So I stepped away from teaching in June of 2022. So it's my 2nd year anniversary.
Congratulations.
Yes, very exciting. To find a way to make that happen. So Peers Not Fears was created to teach and develop leadership skills and confidence in young teens through the process that mistakes are okay, mistakes can happen, and how we process through that. And so that's the whole premise about Peers Not Fears.
That is amazing. I love that background story, and it's so true, like making an example out of the person who does fail and make a mistake, and then you feel like you're not allowed to fail in life or have a challenge or mess up in front of people. And how do you train and teach and lead these students to show them that it's okay to be vulnerable? As a teenager, it's really awkward, it's hormonal, it's emotional, and it's a kind of messy time in your life.
It's extremely messy, and you are trying, especially with the onslaught of social media, you really want to put your best foot forward. You want to be perfect. You want everybody to think everything's fine. And so, yeah, making mistakes is incredibly vulnerable, as you said. So that is definitely a challenge, but the way that Peers Not Fears works, if I'm in a group setting in person with a school, some schools have embarked on this journey, we play games. And when you play games, you naturally make mistakes, and it's fun, and it's funny, and it is like not a big deal. And then we take a step back from the game and we talk about, well, when you did this, what did you learn? And when you did this, how did that help you? And so even just for an example, we'll play red light, green light, but they have to come retrieve something from me, and they have to learn that I'm going to turn around when they're loud. Okay, so they make that mistake almost immediately.
Yeah.
They also have to learn that they have to figure out a way that I can only see one person moving, right? So they're all running up. They also have to learn that speed is not the desire.
Yeah.
So they're learning all of these things by making those mistakes. The way that I do it when I'm working with a group in a virtual program is that I have 15 students, 15 teenagers, and they come from all different places. So they don't know each other on a daily basis. And so they're going to take this shared experience, they're going to go do it in their own communities. The people in their communities don't know what they're doing, so if they make a mistake, nobody knows.
Right.
But then they come back and they share it with the group that also did the same thing, and they can share, I tried this, it didn't work, oh, did you try that? And it's like this experience of listening to each other, experiencing what they did, learning from each other, and really taking risks without having to fall on your face.
Right. That is amazing, because I remember being a teenager, I was so insecure and everything felt so, like if I made one wrong move, everyone would make fun of you, or look at you funny, or just like call you out. So I think it's powerful to not only build leadership skills through play and having fun, but also by building a community of people who they're not necessarily used to or acquainted with on a daily basis. Because it's interesting, because when you're in school, you're kind of stuck with those kids.
Right.
Unfortunately or fortunately, depending on the group. So it's really nice to have an outlet.
Yeah, and if we go back to that like me leaving college and having to learn something new, a lot of kids go to college and it's the first time that they've had to make friends.
It's true.
Since first grade.
That's so true, actually.
And they don't have that skill. And I think of my experience as a college freshman and not really knowing how to make friends and really feeling like I didn't belong in a lot of places. And if we could go and give teens that experience of like building that relationship with somebody, I think maybe it's not so difficult as much with the online. You're meeting people a lot online, people you don't know, and if you're having that interaction, maybe you are building those skills of like making new friends and meeting new people.
That's amazing. I love this, and I'm so passionate about it because I was always interested in leadership, but it's not necessarily what I thought it was, because we talk about leaders being, the loudest person in the room, the narcissist, the people who can just make a scene, and it's usually, as we were talking offline, it's the people who are a little bit quiet and keeping the peace and the kind ones in the background, and it's about vulnerability. I went to Hobie when I was, I think, 15.
Yeah.
Are you familiar?
I am.
In New Hampshire, I went to Co-Brown, and they sent me and another kid there, and I just found it probably similar to your trainings too, a lot of game playing and a lot of team building. It's not like, all right, everyone, this is what you have to do to be a leader, everyone be type A and like telling people what to do. So it's just interesting. So what are some myths that you can break about leadership for people?
Yeah, the biggest myth is that a leader is perfect, right? So it goes back to, we create this system where leaders who get in trouble or make a mistake, they're afraid to share that mistake. And so you'll look around and you see anybody as a public figure, if they make a mistake, they're going to blame somebody else. They're going to deny it. They're going to shift your attention somewhere else, because we haven't taught that mistakes are okay. And we haven't created a system where it's okay to learn from your mistakes and let's accept responsibility. That's one of the biggest myths. And that was the myth that I was suffering under, right? I knew I wasn't perfect, but I played in one on television and I was like, if I had just done this better, it would have been perfect, right? So it's that bar that I keep trying to achieve rather than saying, wow, I did a lot better than I did the last time. That's amazing. The second myth is that a leader has a title. right? And so I'm a student council president, I'm a leader,
Right.
I'm a captain of a team, I'm a leader. Well, that leaves a lot of people who can't fill those roles. So does that mean that the rest of us are not leaders? And that was a myth that I believed, right? I was a teacher, a coach, a mom, an advisor to clubs for students, but I wasn't a leader because I didn't earn the science department coordinator or the assistant principal job. And so if I believe that a leader has to have a title, it makes it really hard for me to pursue and move forward in my life. And if we think of a business, if the CEO or the president is the only one that can make decisions because they're the leaders, that stymies the whole production of that entire company.
Right.
So we all have to see ourselves as leaders so that we can make decisions. And our leaders, who are our true leaders, have to be willing to allow us to make mistakes because they want us to make decisions so that we can move forward. But not every decision is going to be right.
Right.
You know.
And didn't you say 10% of the population has a title, whether it be CEO, VP, president?
Yeah, in any organization, there is no more than 10% titles available. So that's 90% of the rest of your organization that is untitled. So if we're untitled, does that mean that we're not leaders? And that's the myth that I'm trying to break. And so if you can see the actual requirement of being a leader as just making a decision, we're all making decisions.
Right.
It's just how big is that decision? What's the consequence of that decision? You know, what I have for lunch, not a big consequence, but like investing my portfolio in this, you know, stock or bond or out of my zone. But, you know, there's a lot more weighing on that decision. And the other really big myth about leadership is that you're born a leader or you're not born a leader. And that myth is so hard for people to get around because they're like, well, look at that person. They just stand up in front of that class and they can just talk. I cannot do that. Or look at that person who has the confidence to do this, that, or the other thing. I don't have that kind of confidence. Those are skills. Those are things we can teach. Those are things we can practice. So is leadership. And so maybe I'm not a great leader right now. It doesn't mean I can't get better. Doesn't mean I'm going to be a great leader, but I'm going to get better. And one of the most important leaders in every person's lives is the person who raises them.
Yes.
And as a mom, as a dad, my husband, like we don't name ourselves as leaders.
True.
And so it prevents our own children from seeing leadership in their own lives because we're like, well, we're not leaders. We're down here. But really and truly you are.
Yes.
You're leading your family.
It's a big job.
It is a big job.
And I didn't see that really or appreciate it until I went off to college. And then I was like, oh wow, I didn't have it that bad at all. Right, 13-year-old girl, I'm like totally like my mom and I are like this. But like I go to school and I'm like, oh wow, my parents were really leaders and they always led by example and they were role models to me. It's so funny because now as an adult I work with a lot of parents. Seeing their kids or the problems they go through, it's like, look at yourself. You kind of have to look at yourself and see what you're doing because your kids are mirroring you still, even in their 20s and 30s and 40s. So it's so interesting. But it's as a teacher, when you're a teacher, you can't control the parents or like them as leaders. So how do you see parenting affecting these children and these teenagers? And how can you like support that with peers, not fears?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I can do is support parents in seeing leadership opportunities and stepping into leadership themselves and being vulnerable, taking risks, right? One of the things as a parent I always thought was that in order to be my kid's superhero, they couldn't see me make a mistake, right? And so I was always their superhero, especially as a young age, because they didn't know any better.
Right.
But as they get older and they start to see through the veil,
Yes.
if I'm pretending that I'm not making mistakes, if I'm pretending that I'm not responsible for the decisions that I'm making, then I'm teaching them that they don't have to either, right? So it's really hard as a parent to accept responsibility and say that you did something wrong.
Sure.
But if you are struggling with your relationship with your teens, the best thing you can do is to say, I did something wrong. And your kid's like, what? Is that my mom? Did she just say that? And then all of a sudden, like, it breaks this barrier that maybe you have with your teen, and they're willing to maybe accept responsibility for something that they've done. But if I'm not willing to accept that responsibility, they're never going to accept responsibility. And you are absolutely right. They're mirroring the things that we do. And we're not doing them to be bad or do wrong.
Right.
We just don't know any better.
Right. Comes down to awareness is a big thing.
Yeah.
But I love all of this because leadership, especially for young people, is important to set them up for success for the future. What are some traits that you see in children nowadays that are really maybe lacking and that you're really trying to enforce with your leadership training?
It's that inability to make a decision, right?
Yes.
So I don't want to make the wrong decision. I don't want to make a bad decision. I don't want to be caught with my pants down
Yeah.
in front of my peers. So instead of taking that risk, even if it's a small risk, I'm just not going to do anything. And so I'm staying in this zone of zero sum. And that, for me, that's the scariest thing, because we can't move forward ever if we're not willing to make a decision. It may not be the right decision or the wrong decision. And that's the other thing that, like, in parenting, we decide whether that decision is good or bad.
Right.
And it's not defined by what is good or bad by me. It's my kid, and I have two boys, so I often refer to these kids as boys. But if my son slept through his alarm before school, it's a bad decision to me, because now my whole day is messed up, right? I have to do this. I have to help you. But if I stop and think, well, why did he sleep through his alarm? Was he up late trying to navigate a drama that he had with a girlfriend or a friend? Was he studying late for a test and, didn't problem solve? And so when he woke up late, he got that extra sleep rather than going to school failing that test because he didn't do well, or being cranky, right? So, like, I don't know what his goals are.
Right.
I think he probably knows what my goals are, but the decisions are based on, are they meeting my goals?
Yeah.
And when I make a decision, is it my goal that's being achieved, or not whether it's somebody else's goal that's being achieved?
100%. I love how you said indecision. I heard this quote talking about how indecision is worse than making the wrong decision, which is, in a sense, failure or a challenge in society today. But I don't only see it in kids and teenagers, but also adults nowadays.
Yes.
Maybe even more so,
Mm-hmm.
which is crazy. And where do you think that comes from? Is it social media? Is it our culture of being so individualistic? Is it just societal pressures? Because I'm one to be making decisions, and I know probably 90% of them will be right for me, but maybe 10% won't. But it's that probability game in statistics, kind of like the 80-20 rule, or however you want to say it, of as long as you keep pushing forward, something's got to work out. So what do you think that pressure is coming from?
Well, I think it's that feeling that failure is bad. Mistakes are wrong, right? Any mistake I make is bad. And so I think of tests that we take. Anything that we get wrong, we get an S, and it takes our grade down, right? We're not celebrating, you got this wrong, you don't know this, let's learn it.
Yeah.
Right? And I think schools are working towards changing that mindset and working towards competency rather than percentages. But I think there's so much pressure put on us about failure being a bad thing and mistakes being a bad thing. And so we walk this fear that if I make a mistake, or if I make a decision, any decision, it's bound to be a mistake, and I'm going to get caught for it.
Right. That makes sense. And you're talking about leadership gaps in your business and closing those gaps.
Yeah.
What percentage of teens do you actually think believe they're leaders?
Very little. Even the ones with titles. I'll start a program and I'll ask, close your eyes, because I think oftentimes we're very influenced by what other people say.
Oh, totally.
And so I'll ask them to close their eyes or look down and raise your hand if you think you're a leader. And very few will own.
Wow.
If they think they're a leader, even if they think they're a leader, they're afraid to accept or acknowledge or admit.
It almost feels wrong.
Yeah.
Like it's like guilt, which is
Mhm.
so weird. I feel like honestly until like this past year, I wouldn't have raised my hand either. Like I know I'm a leader, but I wouldn't have raised my hand because it's like I want to be humble.
Right.
So it's kind of that
All of
that
those
line.
things.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Thank you so much for tuning in to this podcast episode. Without you, I would not be where I am today. If you haven't already, please subscribe, like, and follow the podcast. And if you haven't already checked out my vlog formatted videos, please do. There I show exclusive behind the scenes on my lifestyle, my routines, my travels, friends, business, relationships, etc. And it's the more laid back, low-key version of the life. Stay tuned for more, and thank you so much again. And let's get back into this amazing episode. And would you consider yourself a leader?
Well, I do now. But it wasn't, I think it was a year and a half ago that I said to myself, I'm working on building leadership skills in others. Why don't I see a leader in me? And it came down to those myths. I didn't have a title that claimed leadership.
Right.
I definitely knew I wasn't perfect. And, I think I knew I could build my skills, but I thought, leaders were just natural, right? So the people who could stand up on a stage and talk, I just thought that was a natural ability. I didn't know you could practice, right? So you start standing in front of your mirror, and then you stand in front of your parents, and then you stand in front of your friend group, and then maybe you stand in front of your classmates, right? So you build your audience, and you build that confidence, you build that skill, and I didn't know those things were something you could develop and get better at.
That is so true. A couple things there. I went to a leadership retreat for professionals in February, and there were a bunch of women. I was the youngest one there, and they were about double my age, but it's all leaders to me. But the interesting part was some of them didn't think they were leaders. But to me, I'm like, you're like my role model. Like, I want to be you one day. And like, even people that I talk to still who are like 10 years older than me, a few years older than me, I'm like, I look up to you. Like, I make sure I tell people that, because if they're a mom with 3 kids and balancing a job and a house and a husband and dogs and all this stuff, like they don't feel like that in their day-to-day. But I'm like, I literally want to be you one day.
Right.
I want to have that life. But they forget that because they're so caught
and
up.
They're in it every day. It's just normal.
Yeah, it's so true. So that's really interesting and important, I think, for all of us to really reflect and think, like, I am a leader.
Yes.
I can be a leader. And people might not know this, but I was really quiet and shy. Not introverted. I've always been a natural extrovert, but I just didn't want to speak out loud. I couldn't read out loud without shaking or like sweating because I was so scared. But after so much practice and years and 100+ episodes of this, like it's gotten so much better because just every day you put in that work, and people think you're naturally born perfect.
Yes.
But they don't see the hours
They
and
don't.
hours of work.
Right. And I think like you also reaffirm every time you make a mistake, and it's that big of a deal.
Right.
You're like, oh, what was I afraid of?
Yeah.
Because I would spend hours like making sure my email was perfect, and all of those hours wasted. You know what?
Yeah.
Well, if I had just sent it without that comma, what would have been the big deal? No big deal.
Right. So much stuff comes at people, like people don't really notice. at the end of the day, there's so much attention going everywhere. Like at the end of the day, they're thinking about themselves.
Exactly. Yeah, the only person that's worried about what you did yesterday is you.
Exactly.
Nobody even thinks about it because they're busy worrying about what they did.
Exactly. And they say public speaking is like one of the most common fears.
Yes.
And like public speaking is not the only skill of leadership. It's a part. It could be
Right,
a part
right.
of it. But I feel like too, telling some stories or anecdotes of leadership in the world could be interesting. Are there specific examples that you've seen with teens that you're like, oh my gosh, like applaud yourself?
Yes, I actually just started to create a series of emails that is the personas of TV characters.
Oh my gosh.
Right, so
I love it.
the Modern Family, there's several kids in that group. So like I will tell a story about Luke.
Yeah.
Right? So we think of Luke as the dumb kid, making mistakes all the time. But that young man, when he is older, will have a wealth of knowledge of what works and what doesn't work. And he is going to be able to take other people and instruct them on how to avoid those mistakes.
Yeah.
Like every time he makes a mistake, we laugh and we think he's so silly and stupid, but really, he's exploring life every minute of the day. I also think of the class clown.
Yes.
Right? The bane of every classroom. The teacher is like, no, I don't want that student. I had an incredible kid be a part of my leadership program who was a class clown. And, he just wanted people to be happy. He just wanted people to laugh. And so I switched the role, right? You stand up here. You guide the class. And even if he's doing some stand-up routine, he still has to realize that he's not going to attain everybody's attention.
Sure.
And so he quickly realizes that if somebody's pulling that attention away from him, then he doesn't, maybe that's what I'm doing to you, Miss Connell, so it's not like it's that realization.
Totally.
And then the other one is the person that you described as yourself, right? So the quiet back, doing her work, not engaging in a loud way. We often forget about those students, right?
Yeah.
They're not a leader because they're shy. They're not a leader because they're quiet. They are leaders because they're the best observers. They listen to everything.
Yeah.
If you are looking for some advice, they're the right person to ask because they're going to listen to your whole story and be able to reflect back to you what you said. And I think so often I definitely disregarded, the silly, the quiet, the class clown because they didn't fit the definition of what I thought a leader was. But I also didn't fit the definition. And here I am running my own company, telling kids how and when and why they should be stepping into leadership to find their voice and make their mark on this world.
Totally.
Right?
And you said peacemakers navigate a system. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So when we are the listener, we're listening to both sides of the story, and you are the peacemaker. So you're able to hear both sides. You're able to put together, hey, did you hear this part from this person? And so we can navigate and create, it's peacemaking, right? So we're we're creating the connection to avoid that conflict, to dissipate that conflict. And that is who we need to build the peace that we're looking for. We need the people who are going to listen to both sides, not listen to you,
Right.
so that I can know what I'm going to respond to.
Right. And that's a big thing too, just in life and with this podcast even. I thought it was about learning how to talk, but it's actually learning how to listen.
100%.
Which is crazy because it's great to have amazing communication skills and be able to speak in front of people, but if you can't listen and you're just waiting to say what you want to say, it's just never going to work, and you're not going to be able to have empathy or be able to absorb other people's energy or what they need and create that synergy that companies and families and communities need to survive.
And schools, for sure.
Schools, definitely. Do you have any stories that you can think of with your own kids that you're like, oh my gosh, you were a leader to me?
Yeah, I mean, I think of them, my two sons, in conflict and how they navigate that conflict and how I'm always wanting to step in and fix their conflict. But my youngest son is the Luke. He is like doing things the teachers are like, oh my gosh, if you would just, sit down. But he is so great with little kids.
Aww.
Right? And so there was this field day that they had. He was in 6th grade and it was the elementary school was running the field day. And he was so excited to be able to go and help. But they didn't pick him because they only picked the kids who had straight A's or all 4s or whatever. And he was crushed. And so I talked about it with him and I said, it's hard when the definition of leaders is ingrained in certain people. It doesn't mean you can't find a way to be a leader. And there was another opportunity where the church that we were part of was hosting a parents' night out, and he went and he ran that, and he played games with all those kids. And so you just have to find a space that's going to see you for who you are.
Right.
And it was just really, really amazing to see him flourish.
Oh, at such a young age, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I love that. And who you are, authenticity is huge. We've talked a lot about being vulnerable and being able to make mistakes or being courageous, but I think authenticity is huge. How do you train that? Or allow people to be their authentic self? Because some leaders are the goofy ones and the crazy ones who can stand up and make people laugh, but other people are the more serious ones who are really good at executing and getting things done, or other ones might be more empathetic and just wanting to help people connect.
Yeah, I think a lot of this comes back to diversity and inclusion and understanding that if I pick people who look like me and think like me, we're all going to solve the problem the same way. And so nobody's ever going to challenge me. Nobody's ever going to think about us solving the problem from a different perspective. And we're just going to keep doing the same things over and over again. And so authenticity comes from feeling like you can belong and you can be your true self. And I think if I am inviting people who only look like me, talk like me, think like me, then there's no place for authenticity because we all have to look the same, be the same, do the same. And if I'm working with people who are different than me, then I have more of an opportunity to be my authentic self because we're all different already.
True. So true.
Yeah.
And especially, it's interesting because I grew up in New Hampshire and it's very famous. But then I went to Boston. I was like, what? This is cool. There are different cultures, and I was almost really uncomfortable actually because I'm adopted and I grew up in a white family, so I'm like, I'm white. But then I go to Boston and there are other Asian people, and I'm like, I don't fit in there, but I don't fit in here. So it's very interesting, especially as a young adult, going from a teenager to a young adult, to be put into a different environment like you were talking about and react to that. But for a while, I was like, oh, I want to be friends with people who are like me, but then realizing pretty quickly, I'm not a group person, and I really enjoy so many different perspectives, and it makes you a stronger, more worldly, more empathetic human being or leader. And it's so true, whether it be in a company or in a school. And how would you suggest a leader, a teenage leader, if they're looking to start a club or build a community, to really reach out to people who are different than them? Because I think that's a hard thing to do in certain scenarios at that age.
Yeah, I think what you just named was that, the community that you live in is likely going to affect how you can pull people from different areas of their lives. But just because you look like somebody doesn't mean that everything is the same. And so I think as what I would encourage students is to really stay in the present and open not assume that you know the person. I think that's probably
So
one
true.
of our biggest challenges as people, is that we see what you look like and we've assumed something about you based on previous experiences or what we've seen on TV or any of those things that are coloring us. And I often try and tell adults and students that biases aren't bad. We have them. We didn't create them for ourselves. What you do about them, how you choose to act about your bias, that's where it becomes good or bad. And when you know you have a bias, you're able to address it. When you don't know you have a bias, you're doing things from a place of unknowing. And it's that fear. Again, it's the fear of being wrong, the fear of being different, the fear of not being accepted. It makes it so hard for us to try and do new things. And a kid who's trying to start a club is just open yourself to new experiences. And if your club fails, it's okay. It's okay.
I had a lot of failures.
You've learned so much.
Yes, it's so true. It's all about the process and learning, which took me a long time to get, because I was like, I just want to get it done. I just want to succeed, or succeed in quotation marks if you're not watching, but it is true. And how, if you had the perfect scenario where you were able to create a leadership, say, plan for all of schools throughout the whole world, what would that look like?
Oh, you asked my favorite question. I do have a plan. My plan is that you start with a small cohort of kids, and then you give them leadership training, basic skills like how to make decisions, how to deal with conflict, how to work together, how to listen, how to communicate. And then once you've worked with that cohort, then you take them into level 2 work, right? So it's an opt-in. You can do this, you cannot do this, but if you opt into level 2, now you're leading the group of kids who've been given this basic training, and you're trying to create an opportunity of leadership within that group. And then that group then goes back into the population of school and restarts it. So it's sustainable, it's continuous, and the part that I love the most is that I'm working my way out, and the kids are working their way in.
I love that. Because it's true, it's about launching these kids to be able to sustain these leadership skills and to just as being a human being. I was at a talk with Jordan Peterson's talk, and he was talking about the idea of like maturation and how when you're in your mid-20s you should be pretty independent, but a lot of times it's a failure to launch. But it's all about launching, whether they be teenagers or later in their life. I think that's amazing that you're just leaving them with the skills. Because there's a difference between being a manager and a leader.
Oh, 100%.
And for a while I thought for some reason managing was like leadership, but no. In order to be a leader, you're leaving people with the skills, and being able to walk away is the biggest thing.
Well, a manager is a title, right?
Exactly.
And
That's true.
And so that's that myth just circulating again and holding us back in so many places.
But I love that model. It's
Me
cyclical, it keeps going, and I love how it's just a cohort of kids to begin with, and then they go back into the student population and spread it.
Yes.
Because not every kid is going to want opt-in, but the kids who do are the ones that are going to be engaged and want to continue.
Yeah, and it came because I saw kids in my classes, my general ed chemistry classes, and they weren't stepping into leadership in this other place where I was advising the student leadership program. And I would say to these incredible leaders, why aren't you applying? Why are you doing this? And they said, I'm not a leader. Why not? I'm not perfect. Right? So that belief that in order to be a leader you have to be perfect keeps all of us from stepping into places where we might make a mistake.
That is huge. And if someone's listening, most people who listen will probably be more my age or parents. A lot of parents listen. How can they join or send their kid to you in Peers Not Fears? Is it just in New Hampshire? Okay, that's what I thought.
No, I started in schools, but I realized really quickly that I'm limited by where I'm located, right? And I want this to be something that is available to everybody everywhere. I really honestly believe that this is a movement that could totally change everything. And so I am online. I have a free Facebook group if you just want to come see what I do. It's Leadership for Our Kids. And my cohorts, my virtual cohorts, are limited to 15, but as soon as I get 15 kids, I'll start a new cohort, right? And so that is, you can find that information on my website, www.peers-not-fears.com.
Perfect. And also, you were talking about some fun activities that you implement in schools or with your leadership groups. Can we maybe do one?
Yes. Yes. I've been thinking about this. I told you about one that I do with just fingers, right? So you and I each have 5 fingers, and we'll do one hand at a time. And our goal is to get to the number 7. Okay. And so we each have one hand, and we're going to put in a number of fingers, and we're going to see if we can get to 7. Non-verbal. Okay. And we start with a fist. Okay. And I'll say 1, 2, 3, and when I say 3, you just put out a number of fingers. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay. So I put out 3, you put out 2. We're trying to get to 7. Okay. We're going to do it again. 2, 3. Okay, I put out 5, you put out 4. Okay. 5 and 3, we're getting closer. 2, 3. And I go to 5 again, and you put out 2. Right? So we've learned each other's pattern. And that is about observing, it's about communicating, and it's about learning.
I love that.
And we made a ton of mistakes.
Yeah.
Nothing bad happened.
That's so true. I love that. It's true. And you were talking to me too about the relationship web and evaluating relationships and energy reciprocation. I thought this was incredible, not only for teenagers, but for literally anyone at any age listening. Because I've done a lot of healing this past year and a half and thinking about the relationships in your life. They say the 5 people that you're surrounded by the most is kind of who you become. And I think that's huge. So can you talk about what this web is, how people can do it, and what the point of it?
Yeah, so it's a personal web. You put yourself in the middle, and then you just draw lines like you would in any situation of all the people that you're connected to. And I do this I encourage parents to do this with teens who have toxic relationship with their friends, right? Yeah. So I know as a mom, if I approach my child and say, so-and-so is not a good friend, right, their wall is gonna go up, they're gonna get defensive, we're not gonna have a good conversation. But if we do these webs, we ask our kids to do the webs, do your own web, because it's so much better to engage in a conversation when you can compare each other's webs. So now I have this web with all of these people coming out. I've got my family, I've got my friends, I've got my coworkers, I've got my therapist, those support systems, and now I'm going to evaluate those relationships. Is the relationship where I am providing energy or the other person is providing energy? So in our relationship, if you were continually coming to me and asking me for help or asking me to do this and that and everything, and I kept saying yes and it was fine, but when I do this web and I see that you're not the only person that's doing that with me, so is this friend, this family member, I start to see that my web, I am giving so much, right? And now that gives me some information on, wow, maybe that's why I'm so tired. Yeah. Maybe that's why I don't have time to take care of the things that I need to do. Right. And as a parent, I can have a conversation with you and I can say, oh, look at that relationship with so-and-so. what do you think about that? How does that make you feel?
Right.
Right? And there's a couple other things that you can evaluate. You can evaluate, is it an accommodating relationship or is it a competitive relationship?
Oh my gosh. So
right? And so at the end of this, you're able to see the kind of relationships that you have. You pick two colors and you evaluate it for two different types of the types of relationships. And every time, so power and control and competitiveness and energy, and you only have two colors, and each color is the same in the relationship. You know, one is a positive color, one's a negative color. And if you start to see that one person is getting all of those negative colors, you might want to evaluate, how is that relationship benefiting you? Or how are all of these relationships benefiting you? And it just opens conversation to not be about a single person. It's not to be about a single incident. It's about how you feel. And it's going to change.
Oh, totally.
Right?
There are seasons of people and relationships, and you kind of learn that over time. I wish I did that when I was like 13, 14, 15. Yeah, my web would have been like, whoa, very interesting. I feel like that exercise is good to do maybe like once a year or every quarter.
Anytime you're feeling depleted or you're feeling like there's something that's just not right, it's a good check-in for yourself.
And as an adult, I realized through my healing journey, I'm just one to be a doer and like a people pleaser. I was a people pleaser, and I'm good at chasing. I'm in sales, so like that's what I do for a living. But I was also doing that in my personal relationships because that's just who I am. I want to make things happen. I want to catch up with people. But then when you stop doing that altogether, and you just like meditate with yourself, and then you see like who's actually reciprocating energy back to you, and then you realize pretty quickly like that circle shrinks, which I think is actually amazing.
It is.
Because it's quality over quantity. And I think as kids, we're like, who's the most popular? Who has the biggest group of people? I was never a group person, but it was like the big group of people in high school that were like popular.
Yep.
And then like everyone else. So it's just like about numbers when you're a kid, because that's all you can see.
Yes. Yes. And I think it's really interesting not to do this. A couple of my activities I encourage kids to do with their friends. This is not one I would do with my friends because it's not about quantity.
Right.
And I think in our teenage years, it feels like it is about quantity.
It does seem so. It's about who has the newest, whatever, backpack, water bottle. It's about who has the most friends coming to their house or like going to prom together. It's just like really competitive in that way. So very interesting. Are there any other activities that you are really just loving and that you suggest maybe for a child or a teenager to do with their friends?
Yeah, I love doing the comfort circle activity where, you know, I think on social media we hear so many people telling us to step outside your comfort zone, challenge yourself. Well, the funny thing is that if you go too far out of your comfort zone, you're in what's called the panic zone. And if you go that far out, you're maybe like, no, I don't want to step outside my comfort zone. And so it's just about 3 circles, and we talk about spiders and dogs and public speaking and singing in the shower, and you just really put where you are on the circle, and you can see that not everything is in your comfort, not everything is in your panic, not everything is in your challenge. Same is true with other people, right? They like move all over the place, and then you can say, well, that's something that's easy for me. I see that it's hard for you. I wonder how we can work together to make it. Because if I step outside of my comfort zone to help you, now I'm in my challenge zone and I've pulled you out of your panic zone. Yeah. I talk about my husband and dogs, right? So I'm afraid of dogs. They're like unpredictable. And so when we're walking down the street, I will freeze. It goes right into my panic zone. And he's like, do you see the dog's tails waving? Do you see the flags are on the along the grass? And he can sort of talk me through.
Right.
And I can feel my nervous energy coming down, but it's not easy for him. He's got to figure out what is the skill, what is the thing that's going to help Lorraine calm down.
Yeah.
And he has no idea if I'm like ready to bolt what that dog's going to do.
It's so true. That's a great example.
Yeah.
A lot of people are afraid of dogs and spiders and all these things, but it's all about communicating. And allowing each other to feel that, but then talking or helping people to a comfort zone. Jordan Peterson this week said, dancing on the edge of adventure. And I think that is kind of describing what you're talking about, because that's life. Like, you can live in your comfort zone forever, or you can just try to like step outside once in a while and like explore a little bit. And I think that's important for kids or teenagers to do, especially with social media, it's tough. What do you think is the best thing about social media for teenagers, and then the worst thing?
I really think the connections that they can make with each other is really cool.
Yeah.
And they get exposed to so many things. It's just, I think that that's really, really fascinating. And I had a conversation with a couple of different students about artificial intelligence because how are you using it? And one of the coolest parts of those conversations was that they taught me so many different ways that I could be using AI. And yes, they are using it to cheat, like that, of course, but they're being way more innovative with it. And so that's what I think, like, there's that double-edged sword, right? Anything in moderation is great. Anything that you expose yourself too much to is a problem.
Totally.
And I think, I've heard several studies say that kids want TikTok to be banned. Like, they don't want it on their phone.
I don't have TikTok.
Right? But they don't want just to be the only one to not have it, right? They want it to be universally taken away. So I think it's that, how do we motivate, how do we give them that confidence that it's okay to say, hey, friends, let's all take TikTok off. I would rather spend time with you, but they need somebody to help facilitate that conversation.
So I about like the first person or the first step. That's the fear again. Just like with adults too. It's so interesting.
And it's not the first person who is the leader, it's the second person.
Oh.
Right? If you've ever seen that dancing on it's like at a festival and there's side of the hill and there's this one crazy guy, he's just up there, he's dancing all by himself and he's just having a good time. It's the next person that joins him that everybody follows.
Oh, you are so right. Because it's the funny person by themselves, but then all of a sudden it's two people and then everyone else is like, oh, I can do it too.
Yes.
That's incredible.
So you just need two people. Like, you get the idea going and you get one other person to join you, more people will follow.
I love that. So that's the thing, you don't need more than like two people to really start something incredible in life in general. Lorraine, thank you so much for your time.
It was so much fun.
So much fun. We'll have to do like another episode.
I love it. I have so many more ideas to share.